Greetings, programs, and welcome back to the TV thing, where today I am going to be talking about Star Trek Discovery. Oh dear. Now, I am coming at this from the perspective of a long-time Star Trek nerd, so that really does cover everything, but even just as a TV show, it's still not a great series. I mean, if you were trying to get someone into Star Trek, this would be a really poor place to start. But most of the problems, or most of the major problems I have with it, stem from it trying to be a Star Trek series. And there's one particular thing that I didn't realise when I first started watching it, but about halfway through, after the mid-season break they had, I was reading one or two articles about it, and it's at that point I discovered all of this, or at that point I realised that it's all supposed to be just a decade prior to the original adventures of Captain Kirk, of the series that aired back in 1966. Just 10 years prior. And that kind of comes to the heart of my problem with this as a show. It's trying to be Star Trek, but it's not. And if it was not a Star Trek show, it might be a better show because of it. But to my mind, it's a bit like the I, Robot film with Will Smith, which was not a terrible film, but it was a terrible adaptation of Asimov. And in that instance, the reason why it was a terrible adaptation of Asimov is because it really wasn't. It actually started out life as an original script, basically, and the whole Asimov part of it was shoehorned in later because I think it was the studio had the rights to it and decided they wanted to use those rights, and so they took this existing original script and they tried to shoehorn a bunch of things in from the Asimov stories. And so we ended up with this really weird thing where you had these characters running around with the names of Asimov characters with various Asimov concepts in the film. And none of it really fit very well because that's not how it had started out life. And that's what Discovery feels like. It feels like it's some other show that they've then retrofitted, that they've then shoehorned all of these various Star Trek elements into. But the weird thing is, I don't think it's the same set of circumstances at all, because the show creators have both worked on Star Trek before. Brian Fuller worked on, he wrote some scripts for both DS9 and I think Voyager as well. And then Alex Kurtzman worked on the film reboot series. Do we call it a series at this point? I don't know. Anyway, and maybe that's quite telling in that it's quite going for the style of the films in a lot of ways. And honestly, I don't hate the films. I know a lot of diehard Star Trek fans do, but they're just, it's fine. They're entertaining. They are what they are. I can just switch my brain off and enjoy them, and it's fine. They can exist at the same time as all of the other Star Trek that I enjoy, and I can enjoy them for what they are. But I can't do that with Discovery because it's supposed to be. It is canonically set in the same universe as the original Star Trek. This is just 10 years before the original Star Trek, and in that context there is so much about it that does not make sense. And I could sit here and nitpick and say, Vulcan logic extremists, and my god, what have they done with the Klingons, who look like they're lifted straight out of the Riddick films, and all other kinds of things. But it really does come down to, it feels like, as I've said, it feels like they have taken something else and then tried to retrofit it to be Star Trek. And even if that wasn't even if this wasn't a Star Trek show, I think it still wouldn't be a brilliant show necessarily, but it would have been a more interesting show because they would have been forced to come up with their own original ideas instead of shoehorning these bits and pieces of Star Trek lore in ways that do not make sense. There were some quite interesting plot twists along the way. there's one in particular, and I'm trying to avoid spoilers here, I guess, same as I always do. But there's one particular bit where there's a little revelation, and it turns out somebody isn't who you think they are. They really aren't who you think they are. And it ties into something that you've known from the start, which seemed kind of corny at the time, but suddenly, in light of this revelation, makes sense. Except the thing that suddenly makes sense, this piece of information that they present, and it's to do with, I'll say it's to do with Captain Lorca's eyes. And if you've seen the show, you'll know what I'm referring to with the plot twist and the revelation that I thought that was quite well done. But the information that they give, that the reason why, as it turns out, his eyes are the way they are, has no relation to anything that's previously been established on screen, and it's just a thing they've made up out of the blue and presented as this piece of information that's always been true, except no. So that's just one example of, if they had done their own thing, if this had been an original show and hadn't been trying to clothe itself in the trappings of Star Trek, that could have been even more effective. But as it was, even though I was sitting there thinking, oh yeah, that's a cool little twist, at the same time I was thinking, but it still doesn't make any sense. So even the bits I found cool were kind of degraded, if that makes any sense, by this knowledge that it doesn't fit with established Star Trek at all. So yeah, and I actually had the idea, which turned out to be kind of right, but kind of not. When I first started watching it, first couple of episodes, I thought, okay, what's going to happen is this is going to turn out to be some kind of, it's going to be an alternate universe, not the mirror universe, but it's going to be an alternate universe, and they're going to come through, and suddenly we're going to have some big plot twist where they pop through into the Trek universe we know, and everybody's wearing the uniforms of the original series, and all the ships look like they do in the original series, and they didn't go that way at all. I mean, I was kind of right in that we do still get things happening with going through different dimensions, but it really didn't pan out the way I thought it would, and that would have made sense to me, to start off the show with it looking and feeling so radically different from any Star Trek that's come before, except maybe the film reboots. But as it turned out, no, they just went down a route that made absolutely no sense whatsoever in the context of it being Star Trek. So I can say it's not a terrible sci-fi series. It got much better over the course of the series, even though there were things that didn't quite work. Like the character of Tilly, for example. For the most part, I thought the cast was fine. I thought the characters were okay. Most of the problems with the characters came from, as I've said, it's trying to be Star Trek, but it doesn't really feel like Star Trek. But yeah, there were just one or two characters that just, they didn't quite fit. They didn't quite work. Tilly was the prime example, but I'm trying to think who else. I suppose to some extent Captain Lorca as well. I wanted to really like... I mean, Jason Isaacs I like as an actor, but Lorca, I mean, he also doesn't quite fit, but on the other hand, it kind of then makes sense later on why he doesn't fit. There's a specific reason for that, so I suppose that I can't really criticise too much, but yeah, I don't know. It still wouldn't have been a great sci-fi series, but it would have been okay, and they would have had to come up with their own ideas as to why things were the way they were, but it is disappointing. I mean, we're getting a second season of it, but it's just overall disappointing that we've waited years and years for another Star Trek to come to the small screen, and this is it. And as a fan, I can't help but be disappointed, because it means that we're not going to get a decent Star Trek show again for at least a couple of years, because I can't see Star Trek Discovery going the distance. Unless somehow, my idea of them popping through and discovering that there is, an alternate universe that is the Star Trek that we know. And, that all turns out to be a correct prediction, except it happens like 2 seasons down the line or something. But if they were going to do that, I think it would be first season or bust. And as it is, bust. So, yeah, I cannot recommend this. If you haven't seen it, if you're a diehard Star Trek fan, I mean, you're probably just going to watch it and get a bit mad at it. As a sci-fi fan, it's just not a great show. It's not. It gets better over the course of the show, but yeah, I mean, one of the things they wanted to do, which I should maybe touch on before I wrap this up, is that they actually wanted to have more conflict going on within the Starfleet characters themselves, because that's been one of the touchstones of previous series. Is however rough it gets, the ship's crew themselves are a family by and large, and the only significant deviation we've had from that has been in Voyager, where we had along the way 1 or 2 characters turn out to be not who they said they were, although in Voyager it was a bit of a damp squib. With Seska and all that kind of thing that went on there. And you do occasionally get minor characters that will pop up that turn out to be not so nice people. In fact, that's a thing that... I mean, I'm trying to think, going back all the way to the original series maybe, but certainly since TNG, you've had plots in episodes where it turns out some crewman has done something nefarious in the past. But... the main cast, the main characters, they've always, there's been a bit of tension here and there, but they've always gotten on along. And we've never had anything like Babylon 5, where you have characters drifting away from each other over the course of the show. So I think that's what they were trying to go for. But they went a bit overboard and tried to cram that all into the first episode, practically speaking. It's like they finally had permission to do this thing and just... did it with gusto and great glee just as soon as they possibly could, instead of doing it in a way that perhaps made more sense. Because the first 2 episodes alone, the conflict felt really forced. It was not a good piece of character development out of the gate. And I don't know, it's like they got permission to do this and just let it go to their head. So... I mean, it's not a bad thing overall, but it's like a bad idea to have elements of the main cast be in conflict with each other, main characters be in conflict with each other. But generally speaking, you have to build up a rapport first, and then, you have some split, some difference happening. And as it was, they tried to do that right out of the gate. At a point where the audience has zero emotional investment in any of these characters. So, yeah, I don't know. It was just one of the many, many issues I had with it. Just that alone, they got completely carried away with it, and it just ended up making the whole thing feel, I don't know, off-kilter from the start, quite apart from all the other problems I have with it. So I did say I was going to try and be brief. So I guess we'll wrap this up here. So yeah, Discovery. I absolutely can't recommend this either as a Trek show or as a sci-fi show especially. But I'm sure if you're a Trekkie, you might have tried watching it anyway. But if somehow you haven't and you have waited this long for a recommendation, I would say this is one you can skip. Go watch DS9. Go watch Voyager if you have to. Voyager's still better than this. Go watch Enterprise. Enterprise got good. Hell, you know what would have been... this is complete nothing to do with anything, but man, having the Enterprise cast back for a film would be pretty cool at this point. But that's probably never going to happen either, so anyway. So that's it for this episode of the TV thing, and it's a pity I couldn't be more enthusiastic about it, but... man, they really screwed it up, didn't they? They really made it not be Star Trek. Yeah. Anyway, so hopefully you found this episode enjoyable, useful. If you did, you can hit the like button. You can leave any comments below. You can sub to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, stay tuned for more.